Let me just start by thanking Roberto and Yong and CAC organizing committee for organizing the mini symposium. It's so nice to see many friends and colleagues here. And it's my honor to be part of the panel with Cheryl and Maggie. And I've learned a lot from their talks. And I'm not a migration scholar. My main research is really about the internationalization of Chinese companies, their employment strategies and labor relations in Africa. But during my fieldwork, I had the opportunity to live with Chinese expatriates, commute with them to work and participate in their social activities. So these experiences allowed me to learn more about their lives and life aspirations. So I want to share some of my observations in the field, and I look forward to learning from other panelists and audience. And just a note, I do have two little Zoom bombs at home. I apologize in advance if you hear any noises in the background. I'll start by explaining what I mean by expatriates and how they are different from other Chinese presence in Africa. I'll then go to the specific of my research in Ethiopia. And in particular, I'll look at the rationale behind expatriation at firm, state, and individual levels. I'll then examine how expatriation is structured in different companies. Lastly, I'll discuss the lived experiences of expatriation. The Chinese expatriates, I think they are a unique subset of the overall Chinese presence in Africa, and they have certain characteristics. They don't really consider themselves as migrant immigrants or sojourners because both may imply kind of long-term stay and certain impetus to integrate or immerse in the host society. But for expatriates, when they went abroad, there's an understanding that their stay in Africa will be short-term, job-oriented, and closely managed and regulated by their employers. So their mobility to a certain extent is bound by their employment relations with the globalized Chinese companies or by their contracted relations with labor dispatchment companies that organize their overseas travel. And of course, over years, some expatriates could become immigrants, but the number is quite small. And also, Chinese expatriates are unlike the Western expatriates in developing countries or the emerging Chinese transnational elites in the developed world. Both groups enjoy access to capital, political resources, or professional expertise, and can practice flexible citizenship across national borders. The Chinese expatriates in Africa, as many network members have written about, they are vulnerable in many ways and are constrained by their own life circumstances and the broader socio-economic conditions in China and in Africa. Then why does expatriation become an important element of China-Africa mobility, and how is it arranged? What are the lived experiences of expatriation? These are the questions I'll try to answer in this research. My field work was conducted between 2013 and 17 in Ethiopia. So over the past decade, we've seen a rapid growth of Chinese investment in the country. And together with increased business activities, a sizable number of Chinese have arrived in Ethiopia. So when I was in the field asking people how many Chinese are there, I usually got different estimates, but the numbers being somewhere between 70 to 110,000. The data I presented today was based on research with 66 Chinese working in construction, telecommunications, and manufacturing companies. And this is certainly a small sample, but it covers relatively diverse personal backgrounds in terms of age, residential place in China, educational levels, employer status, and job position. And I want to highlight the last part because it will come back later in my talk. The sample includes 16 people at managerial positions, meaning they're high or mid-level managers, and 28 who are professionals. By that, I mean engineers, translators, financial specialists, human resource officers, etc. And I have 22 operational staff, that is technicians, workers, drivers, and other people at this level. And when we think of expatriation, firm will be the main player in organizing expatriation. And there are multiple rationales behind firms' use of expatriates. And expatriates can really smoothen communications between headquarters and foreign subsidiary. This is especially the case for Chinese companies that engage in frequent, basically daily communications with the headquarters, Chinese governments, and Chinese banks. So it really requires Chinese language proficiency, but also someone that understands the Chinese social and work norms. Expatriation also helps retain the managerial consistency within companies. So from managerial system to daily work practices, overseas companies are deeply influenced by the norms and practices developed in China. Expatriation will also allow companies, especially the new globalizers, to develop a cadre of globally competent managers and professionals to kind of help future internationalization endeavors. And since many Chinese companies lack the foreign operational experiences, using expatriates is also a way to ensure productivity in the first years of globalization. There's also a shared managerial perception of locals being locals lacking key characteristics of an industrial workforce like diligence, skillfulness, productivity, and the willingness to work overtime. So Chinese companies have been really dependent on expatriates to undertake key managerial and technical tasks. And in addition to firm dependence, it's also crucial to emphasize the role played by Chinese government to facilitate expatriation. Overseas labor dispatching has been used as a strategy to mitigate domestic pressure for job creation in the post-reform era, as state sector reform has led to massive layoffs of former public sector employees. So more recently, overseas labor service is taken as a strategy to achieve the targeted poverty alleviation agenda put forward by President Xi Jinping. So Chinese government at different levels have worked closely with overseas companies and labor service agencies to facilitate the recruitment of individuals from poor households. So this photo here shows one of the matchmaking meeting organized by a local government in Henan province. It helps send people from the Panhe village to work for companies of Henan region that have overseas projects. Then at the individual level, I want to highlight some variations in personal motivations among the three groups of managers, professionals, and operational staff. And from the graph here, and each little triangle represents one group of people, and we can see salary is really an important motivation for all expatriates. So overseas job pays more than a comparable job in domestic context. So managers and professionals can get somewhere between 2 to 3 times more than they earned in China. Operational staff usually get 30 to 50% more. So, but the operational staff are more dependent on this income to sustain their family's livelihood, and that's why family stands out as an important motivation for this group. Professionals are also attracted by the job content. They especially value the experiences of working in a foreign context. And managers also take expatriation as a learning opportunity to improve their managerial skills, which can potentially translate to their upward career mobility. Now, having looked at the rationale behind expatriation, I want to discuss some of the sectorial features of expatriation arrangement. I'll start with the construction sector. We've already known that the construction sector in Africa is heavily dominated by large Chinese SOEs, but there's also a group of provincial SOEs, as Cheryl has discussed in her talk, and also private companies. They are often overlooked because in many cases, they are not the main contractor, but work as subcontractors. And many of them don't even register as a foreign investor in the host country. I'll just take one stadium project in Ethiopia that I studied as an example. The main contractor, which is a very well-known SOE, works with at least 5 private subcontractors on this project, and each party will assemble their own workforce. From the table here, we can see that the contractor employs more managers and professionals than operational staff, and the subcontractors, on the other hand, have fewer managers and engineers, but a much larger body of expatriate technicians and workers. And on their immigration documents, all these Chinese are indicated being employed by the contractor SOE. But in fact, those working for the subcontractors don't have actual employment relations with the contractor, neither do they enjoy the benefits of state employees. They were assembled by the subcontractors through labor recruiters in China and organized abroad by labor dispatchment companies. And all these Chinese live on site inside the construction compound, and which is a familiar arrangement in domestic construction sector. If we look at the spatial layout here of the compound, we'll see it's divided into separate zones for the contractor and subcontractors. The contractor zone is much better equipped with separate sections for offices and the living quarters. They also get 2 patches of garden to grow vegetables, and the dorms in the contractor zone are more spacious and a better furniture. Then there's less occupants in the dorms. The subcontractor zone, on the other hand, is very compact, and employees of each party will work, eat, and socialize in their own area. There's very minimum internal interactions across the internal borders. Moving on to the telecommunications, it really represents a relatively knowledge and a technology incentive sector, employs the relatively educated group of expatriates. And my research was one Chinese telecom company shows it follows a typical hierarchical structure that we see a lot in large Chinese companies. And from this organizational structure, we see expatriates represents the green, the blue color here showing only Chinese, the green color here showing both Chinese and Ethiopians. So we see expatriates take up all the high-level positions, most mid-level positions, and some of the low-level and the rank-and-file positions. And and all these expatriates were selected from existing employees in domestic branch, and when they get offered, they get the chance to negotiate their overseas tenure and contract details. Their salary came with 3 parts: base salary, bonus, and overseas allowance. The base salary is same as what they earned at home. Ethiopia used to be a very profitable market for the company, and employees expect a good amount of bonus. So that's why it attracts many expatriates to go to Ethiopia. And overseas allowance is determined by the country of destination's poverty level, environmental harshness, the social political stability. Is also related to one's job rank and the length of time they spend overseas. So overall, higher allowance for riskier, poorer places, and more money for people at higher positions and stay longer abroad. So this really incentivizes expatriates to work harder, to get promoted, and spend more years abroad. And all expatriates in the company live in multi-family houses leased by the company, and the house is the primary place for expatriates to socialize. They will occasionally cook shared meals, hold barbecue party, and play games. Managers, professionals, and rank and file employees are often mixed in their residence, which really contributes a kind of a congenial management employee relations. But it's also ensured a mechanism of managerial oversight upon employees' after work lives. So when I live with them in one of the house, the manager will sometimes organize informal meetings in the living room in late evenings and during weekends to discuss work. So there's really a mix of residence and work in the expatriate house. Lastly, the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing really represents an important area of China-Ethiopia relation. The total capital investment in the sector is not very large, but if we look at the number of registered Chinese investors shown by the figure on the left, manufacturing is the top sector. And my focus is on the manufacturing companies working in the Eastern Industrial Zone developed and operated by the Chinese. And these companies are mostly privately owned, and they produce a variety of goods like textile garments, bedding sets, and auto parts. And most of the companies adopt a flat organizational structure that includes only a few expatriates as managers, accountants, or senior technicians. And locals take up over 90% of their workforce. And the Chinese expatriates came abroad through various channels. Some were recruited from the domestic branches when the company decided to open up a factory in Ethiopia, just like those in the telecom companies. Some were hired from the market through labor outsourcing companies, and some were in fact the relatives of the owner, so they are kind of running family businesses. Others had worked for the company in China, but the company then went bankrupt and had to relocate somewhere else, so they ventured abroad with the owner together to Ethiopia. And all expatriates live in dormitories on the upper level of the factory sheds. They follow a very strict timetable and will be fined for these behaviors. And here's a table showing some examples of rules in one company. So someone stay in the kitchen area after 7:30 a.m. will be fined 100 RMB. And smoking in the production area is 1,000 yuan fine. And sleeping during night shift is another 100 RMB. So this is very familiar way of this is the way that companies manage is very similar to the dormitory labor regime that we see allowed in China's special economic zones. And in the past, the expatriates will go outside to visit parks and have some local food in the nearby towns. But given the political instability in the recent years, most of the Chinese will stay inside the zone all the time. So in the last, I want to talk a little bit about the lived experiences of expatriation and the implications for their future socio-economic abilities. So from what we've discussed, expatriates are far from a homogenous group. These Chinese are hired at different ranks and under different contracts. So if we compare the group of expatriates based on job positions, we'll see the managers and professionals are much younger than the operational staff, and they represent a generation of Chinese trained at good universities, but came with very modest family background. And half of them were regional migrants. By that I mean cross-provincial migrants. And they moved from small towns to large cities in China before they embarked on overseas travel. Working abroad really provide them an opportunity to accumulate wealth and experience with the hope to increase their social mobility back home. And the group of operational staff, however, is primarily middle-aged men without college degree, but had worked in their sector for at least a decade. They were not competitive in the domestic or international job market, and they relied on the overseas work to sustain their livelihood. Only 23% of them were interprovincial migrants, and most were either inner provincial migrants or were just rural residents, and they were directly recruited from their hometown. And they work longer hours while abroad and have much shorter annual vacations. So we see expatriation process really recreates and widens the social differentiation in the Chinese society.
Ding, you have 2 more minutes.
Sure. For many Chinese expatriates, overseas experience are marked by double displacement. First, being separated from families and social relations in China, and then becoming isolated in the host country. And the segregated life is institutionally designed and maintained by the companies through the collective provision of residence, food, and transportation. As we can see from the photos here, are some canteens from different companies. And in the case of construction company, managers impose active control to restrict the employees' local mobility. So for them, working abroad is really a point-to-point movement between different compounds. Related to displacement is the increased mobility among expatriates, and companies have high turnover rate actually due to the cultural and logistical challenges that expatriates experienced in the first year, and also their personal and family commitments. So some expatriates couldn't stay through the contract period. And on the other hand, some expatriates become hypermobile, taking up expatriation posts in different countries. So among my surveyed Chinese, 32 reported having worked in other countries before the Ethiopian post. And this map shows the recent 2 expatriation destinations. And Africa is clearly an important continental destination. The overseas mobility for these Chinese also reinforces their displacement, but also results in their immobility in the process of returning home. So except for a few well-connected expatriates, most people find it challenging to land in a good repatriation position. As the manager told me, if one came out to be shortly after being recruited or not well connected in the company, he or she cannot find a good position back home. So as a result, some managers and professionals choose to stay longer as long as their life circumstances allows. So for them, the current post at least generates a good economic return for their family. And if they end up being promoted to high-level manager positions in the subsidiary, it might increase their chances of getting a good repatriation offer. But this career potential is not for operational staff. They are kind of disadvantaged by their age and educational background to succeed in domestic labor market. And most find themselves constantly on the move in order to stay employed. I think I'll stop here and we can discuss more during discussion, and I look forward to any of your thoughts. Thank you.